On this episode, we talk about first steps that you will take once your game is ready and you've got an email list. Where do you go from there? You want to get your Kickstarter funded, and there's a lot of things that you might not know because it's your first time or it's your first big project and you've really got to make this one count. We're interviewing a guy that has a passion project he's been working on a long time and wants to get it right. And so he asks me a lot of questions and in essence interviews me on this podcast about my experience in business, my experience as a tabletop publisher, a games publisher, and as a marketer for what it is that he should do to get it right the first time. Let's dig in.
Game begin.
Let's go.
Lightning bolt, Facebook ad, Facebook ad. That's awesome. Hey everybody, and welcome to another awesome episode of Crowdfunding Nerds. I am your host, Andrew Lowen, and I am joined not by Sean nor by Rick. Instead, in their place, I have an Aussie from down under who I'm really excited to interview. His name is Paul Bedford. He runs a company called Hard Fun Games. He's producing a game called Hunted by a God, and we have crossed paths online many times. But well, first of all, welcome to the show, Paul.
Thank you, mate. It's both amazing and surreal to be here, especially after 4 years of listening to you guys and sucking as much information as I can out of you. Being on the show is great.
Thanks, man. I'm blessed to have you on the show because you had there was a really interesting discussion that you prompted in I can't remember what group it was. I don't know if it was in the Crowdfunding Nerds community or Board Game Design Lab or something, but you asked about the business side of running a publishing business, and you had a lot of really great questions, and you were basically saying, hey, I had a business partner that kind of was supposed to take care of those things that vacated himself from the business, and now I have to do this on my own. So what do I not know is kind of what it came down to.
Yeah, and what I don't know turned out to be a lot. Yeah, so essentially, I was in business with a partner who, as you said, withdrew, and then I found out that the things I don't know was a lot, Andrew, because I handled the creative side of things, and he handled the business side of things, and I just finished the creative side of things when the withdrawal happened. And so that sort of dropped me in the, let's say, quagmire, to use a nice podcast, family-friendly podcast term. And then it hit me like a ton of bricks that I had to do all the Kickstarter and, related gear on my own. So that prompted me to write a fear-filled post on Board Game Design Lab, basically saying, I don't know where to start. Like I know a lot of information. I just don't know where to start with that information. Like you guys and a Board Game Design Lab and people like Jamie Stegmaier and many other posts were great at supplying the information of what has to happen. I was literally looking as a complete noob, the where to start, like the step-by-step where to start.
Yep. Yeah. And it's very interesting because so maybe in this particular case I should share my expertise because people are going to be, normally I asked our guests to share their expertise and why people should listen to them, but in this case I know I have, we have a base of listeners that are like, okay, you're expert enough for me, we're just going to listen anyway. But we just finished our second Kickstarter, so we raised close to $1 million so far. Amazing. If you counted what we did in our pledge manager and in BackRocket in the first campaign, we've done just about $1 million in funding through crowdfunding so far.
That's huge.
But we've done at this point well over 200 Kickstarter and GameFound campaigns. We've raised closing in on $30 million for creators in the games space as a marketing company. But then beyond that, I've worked for companies that have made it onto Shark Tank and gotten deals. We've done as seen on TV products. I've worked with big intellectual properties in the games industry. You know, a lot of Modifius Entertainment products like Fallout and Dune and things like that, but
Yep.
also others in many others on my shelf behind me.
Yep.
And then we've worked for about 900 service-based businesses over the years, ranging in from one person with an idea or like a locksmith with just one person running it, all the way to businesses that have several hundreds or even thousands of employees. I like to work for small businesses now because when you work for a big business, you're kind of a line item expense. The marketing is always
Yep.
an expense. You oftentimes are switched out when either the chief operations officer or the person in charge of marketing, the chief marketing officer or whatever, whenever they switch, which is like 2 years or 3 years, they and the new person brings with them their own vendors. And so oftentimes you are canned after between 2 and 3 years. And that type of hustle is one that I decided I didn't want to constantly hustle to have to earn new large clients. What I decided instead is I would focus on small businesses that range generally between 500 to 1500 a month in retainer, and I would do my best for them, because a lot of the time what happens is when the marketing works, they trust you very much, and those people will stick around for years. So our average client retention is well over 4 years on the service business side. I've had clients from the time we started offering SEO marketing. I have a window tint company, an acupuncturist, a preschool, and a couple of others that have been with me since 2013. So we've had consistent clients for years and years, over a decade. Our longest client relationships at this point, actually 2012. And so it's been 12 years since it was our longest client relationship. I have 8 employees on the Crowdfunding Nerds side, and Next Level Web and Crowdfunding Nerds are 2 brands of the same business. Next Level Web is kind of the service based business. So like plumbers and locksmiths and air conditioning people and solar companies and whatnot, we help them get to the top of Google and other things. And then others, the product side is more Crowdfunding Nerds, where we work with really fun board games and things like that. And so
And
that's
that's why I'm
some of
hiring
my
you.
expertise. Yes.
That's why I'm
There you go.
hiring you.
Yeah. One
Absolutely.
time I brought one company from a consistent revenue on Amazon of $4,000 a month. It took me 2 months, and I brought them to a monthly revenue of $400,000 a month, and I earned the right and privilege to continue working for them. And that
Somehow.
is what made me think, maybe I don't want to work for these big companies all the time, because I felt like
A huge
sour.
reward. Huge
Yeah,
reward for like
yeah.
just watching
Well,
that
they,
happen and knowing that you did that single handedly. That's amazing.
yeah. Well, also there was the understanding. So they had their former company would charge them 10% of whatever they were able to raise on Amazon. I was like, well, I'll do it for 10%, and they're like, I'll do it for 5. And they said, okay, well, just you get to work and then we'll talk. And so instead of making 5% of 400 and whatever $1,000 a month, they were like, we don't want to pay this guy that much. We were making like $6,000 a month in retainer and really needed them as a client at the
Right.
time, and they just knew it and stiffed us. And it was like,
Oh man. Okay.
I learned a really, really valuable lesson.
Yeah.
Should I even
Yeah.
be messing with these people? And
Yeah. Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
yeah.
And the small guys will appreciate you, and they sort of look to companies like yourself for um, for marketing, especially yourself, because you work this like very heavily in the tabletop space. And I mean, you know, you went through a Kickstarter twice with your own design. Like there's no one better qualified. Um, so yeah, and congrats on Deliverance again. Like that was huge. I was listening right up until your launch, and I'm thinking I don't know how you do it with 7 kids and training in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, but huge congrats. And while I'm saying congrats to Sean on the birth of Tabitha. I'm assuming that's
Yeah.
why he's taken a bit of time off. Um, but
Yep. Yeah. So
yeah,
Sean is not on a podcast right now because
yeah,
he's I guess
sleeping.
his daughter's about 3 weeks old now.
he's
So
he's
yep,
either
he's
sleeping or
not
wanting to
sleeping.
sleep.
Yep.
Oh man, oh that's
Yeah.
cool.
So we'll
That's
have to
cool.
get an update from him when he hops back on,
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
yeah, so that's some of my expertise in regard to business. I I find that my experience and what I say and what I share comes from people that are larger and more successful than me. I've helped people get acquired, and sell their businesses for millions of dollars. I've worked myself out of a job because people have grown large enough that they can now have an in-house marketing person, and they can save a little bit of money by giving that person our responsibility. I've had, $30 million a year businesses that I've worked for, and I've worked for, um, you know, $3,000 a year businesses and everything in between. And
Yeah,
so now the you have questions. It's
I
almost
have
like I'm a
questions.
Khajiit. You have questions. I have
I have
letters.
questions. I do
Um,
indeed. So I thought, as you mentioned before, like usually you have guests on that know stuff, and I don't know anything. So my my role here today is to literally like pick your brain. And as I said, over the many years, I have, I mean, I've um, you know, so many notes about what you guys have said, but it's the order of things. So now that I've done the game design, obviously because of all that information, I do have like a fundamental understanding of Kickstarter and all that sort of gear. Um, I just don't know the first steps, Andrew. So I have questions. Andrew, are you ready? So
yeah, yeah. Start
I'm just
rifling
gonna,
them off.
I'm literally gonna read them out. All right, because otherwise I'll
Okay.
stuff them up. All right, so I've said the first question is called baby's first steps. All right, so which is
Yep.
topical because of yourself and Sean. So essentially, my game is done, and the mailing list is still small, which is another topic we'll get to when, you know, eventually. But if your game is done and your mailing list is strong enough and you're ready to move into Kickstarter, what are the first steps I take? Do I get a Stripe account? Do I get a preview page? Do I contact Kickstarter? Like literally, what do I do? Like
Okay.
today, Andrew, what do I do?
All right. So starting from the position of your game is ready, your mailing list is solid enough that you could go to Kickstarter. So there are several lines of things to consider. So the first one is one that I'll spend the least time on because I normally spend the most time on it during these podcasts, which is have a plan in regard to marketing. Like, where will you go? What will you say to your people to kind of get them to come with you? So if it's like, all right, I'm going to Kickstarter, don't launch tomorrow. You have to let your people know. So what I always do is I have a kind of a timer that is like 90 days out. So when I hit the timer that I'm going to go to Kickstarter, I plan on launching on Kickstarter in 90 days from the moment I hit my proverbial timer. And what I can do all the things at that time, but the dominant purpose of that 90-day timer, really two things. Number one, you have to give reviewers copies of your game and enough time that they can actually um, review the product. They need at least 2 months of time, but you should contact them before that. But they usually need the game itself for between 6 to 8 weeks in order to reliably give you a good review.
Yep.
And then, the bonus is if they finish early, then you can hopefully have somebody else lined up because, prototypes are very expensive.
Mm.
You can have somebody else lined up to take the prototype. So the reviewer will mail the prototype to someone else at your expense, of course.
Yep.
Um, and they're very used to, normally it's mailing the prototype back to you. So, they will, it's kind of like built in that they'll do that for the most part. And so you have them mail it to a new address, and then you have the new reviewer pick it up and whatnot. And that's how you do more with fewer copies. But so have a marketing plan first of all. Second of all, you definitely need to make sure that you are protected in a liability from a liability perspective. So you should not go to Kickstarter as a sole proprietor that uses your own your personal, banking account, for, to have Kickstarter deposit money. What you need to do is you need to have, a limited liability company or an S corporation. I'm not sure how it works in Australia, but I can
Yeah,
say
but
that
it's similar
you
things.
want to
Yep.
you want to
Yep.
incorporate. Very good. So you want to incorporate, in the US, an LLC has the least amount of work to do. It's, my uh Next Level Web is a subchapter S corporation, and Low End Games is an LLC, and Low End Games is just easier to run. It's called a single member LLC, but it's less expensive and less time consuming to operate the technicalities of the LLC. And so that's generally what I recommend. But in any case, you need to make sure that your whatever company name you have is listed on the bank account. So that means you have to get a fictitious business name. In the US, that's what it's called. You go to your county recorder, they say, okay, you are now this company, and you buy your website address and other things like that. And so now it's like, okay, for you, Paul, your Hard Fun Games. So hardfungames.com, and or whatever it is, hardfun.games. You can
Yep.
do all sorts of things like that. And you want to make sure that you're incorporated. The reason for that is because if something goes wrong, and if backers feel grumpy about it, you need to be shielded from liability. If something, for example, COVID and the shipping situation that arose capsized businesses,
Yep.
and you need to be able to walk away from the business if that happens without also losing your house. And
Yeah.
the way to do it, because people will try to collect on what you owe, and you owe them because they backed your game. You owe them the game, and if they can't get the game, they're going to get other things. And so the company liability shield will help you very much if you are, unless you're, embezzling money from your own company and putting it, if you like, for example, we made roughly $490,000 after this last Kickstarter. If I were to take half of that and build like a cool pool in my backyard, and then later down the road I were to say, well, hey everybody, I'm sorry, I can't actually fulfill this,
Can you come
shipping
over
is
for a
too
swim?
expensive and whatever. Some smart, yeah, exactly. Some smart people are going to be like, hey, you didn't have a pool 2 years ago or a year ago. Where'd that come from? And the IRS in the US will say, yeah, you're, you know, or actually it's the Securities and Exchange. No, let me think. What is it? The it could be the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. But the company that goes after corporations for, uh, you know, uh, improperly trading stock with insider trading and other things like that.
Okay.
Those people are the ones that will go after you, and because you're in essence pulling a Bernie Madoff and defrauding people if you
Yep.
don't deliver. So
Yep.
the key is you want to make sure you have an actual business,
Yep.
um, and that is what you apply for. One of the first things you do in Kickstarter is you have to confirm a bank account information. So you confirm your name, your company's name, and then your bank account information needs to match that information. And if it doesn't, it's a really easy way to get jammed up, because you need to be able to share, um, information that looks consistent. Kickstarter will use, like a third party to verify you and other things like that. You do not need a Stripe account. You don't need anything like that. Some countries have issues, like some in South
You
America
don't you
or
don't need a
like the Middle
Stripe
East.
account. Did you have a Stripe account with the kick? You don't need a
Correct.
Stripe account. Okay.
I it's Stripe is very easy to get, but
Yeah.
Kickstarter has a Stripe account, and
Aha.
you will use Kickstarter's Stripe account,
Right.
and they'll deposit money into your bank and whatnot. You can very easily get a Stripe account, but you do not need to integrate any
But,
sort of like
okay.
technical stuff into Kickstarter. Kickstarter is like GameFound 2 is like an entirely separate processing, from what it is that you personally will use in a
Right.
company.
Right. I see. Okay.
So
Cool. All right. So
yeah.
I've got all that. In Australia, you form a company, you get a family trust to protect your family assets and all that sort of gear. So my wife and kids still have somewhere to live. should things, take a downturn on the game. And a backyard's not quite set for a pool, so I have to the expense to go somewhere else. But like literally, so if I have all those things and everything's set up, so next is like what do I do next? I'm going to ask very simple questions. So what do I do next? Like do I start a preview page? Do I um
Mhm.
do I put a BGG page up, or what's next after that?
Yeah. So in this 90-day window, like we're kind of talking about a 90-day window when you're like, yes, we're ready for Kickstarter, we're going to do this.
Yep.
So there are all the things that you can do, and then there's what's actually possible to do. Your capacity for doing things will increase as you do them. So what I mean by that is, like from a bird's eye view, the first Kickstarter campaign I ran, I tried to get all my ducks in a row. I tried to do my very best, but there's only so much that the mind can retain until you actually go through it. And you're like, I would do this differently, or I would do that, or I know I should have done this and didn't, and I'm going to do it this time. And so your ability to retain information will increase in your second campaign. So there are certain things that you need to have in place that if you do not, they will capsize you. You will fail.
I was going
And
to
there are
ask that. Like,
other things that
what's
would
the
be
big
really
things that can
nice to
sink you?
have in place.
Right. So they are.
So and very very importantly, marketing is, I will say, kind of in the middle there. By the way, it's not something that if you fail to market properly will always capsize you, but it is one of those things that will really hurt you, or you have to get lucky and all of that. There are people that market very poorly that do pretty well, or that do all the wrong things and tend to and were successful.
Hmm.
Um, don't listen to those people. Don't do what they did.
I think they're
Do
anomalies.
market.
I think they're
Yes,
anomalies.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So don't base your plan on the what is it called? The outlier, the
Yeah.
anomaly, the thing that is not normal, right?
It's like when people
So
point out, oh, he smoked and drank
the
all his
things that
life,
will
but he lived to
capsize you.
92. But like, I'm like, yeah, well, he's an
Yeah.
anomaly. Yeah, don't do
Yeah,
that.
like Warren Buffett, all he eats is donuts,
Yeah.
So
Yeah, he's an anomaly. He's also got the best doctors in the
yeah,
world, I guarantee.
that's right. So now the things that will capsize you, um you need to have an effective offer when the time comes for Kickstarter. You need to have an effective offer, meaning that the price of the game compared to the quality of components that people are receiving needs to pencil out. I need to feel like I'm getting a good value for what I'm paying. And so if you do not have a good offer, so if the overall, what we're talking about is the total amount that I'll pay for the total amount of value that I get. If I feel like I have to pay more than the value I'm receiving, I probably won't buy it. And or maybe I'll buy it if there's something else. Like if I really like Paul because, I'm your second cousin and we really recently reconnected and I want some way to, help you or be involved in your life. There's the little gap, the gap from value to what I'm receiving
Yep.
compared to what I'm paying, that is filled by something like that.
Yep.
So oftentimes friends and family will help you with your first campaign. They'll say, "Wow, I'm so excited. You have a business. Let's all try to help you." And you'll have more friends and family that aren't naturally game players that might not be interested in your game that will help you. But the people that you need to consider are those that are consumers that will actually, you can't have a company without actual consumers that want your stuff. So you need to plan for them and plan to have a good value proposition for them so that your offer at the end of the day, the shipping and the cost of the game needs to make sense. If you have a $50 game and $30 shipping, that's not a very great, I mean, I don't know why you're charging so much in shipping, but if your game was $60 and your shipping was 20, then that's the same exact ratio, or I'm sorry, it's the same exact price that I pay overall. I pay $80, but it looks better to me, and even better if your game was 70 and shipping was only 10. It's like, oh, well,
Right.
shipping's pretty good. And I'm gonna judge your game though as though it's a $70 game. So it's
Yeah.
a $70 game. I would expect certain types of components in that game. like maybe miniatures would kind of start to make an appearance there, just a few of them maybe. um I definitely would expect board cards, decent quality components and all of that. If your game's over $100, I mean, it better be over 100 because there's lots of plastic in there or some other really cool thing, or must be really large or something like that.
I suppose
um
it's judged against competition too, like
yeah,
you know
yes,
what
exactly.
is
So
currently coming
it's
out,
really a
and
matter of,
yeah,
yeah, but not in the way that you might expect initially, where it's like what like we were talking before this podcast about Oathsworn, and how Oathsworn and people who like Oathsworn tend to like Deliverance and whatnot. If Oathsworn was launching at the same time Deliverance was, there would be certain people that would say, well, I like both. I have to decide on one or the other because they only have so much money for, disposable income.
yep.
But what we're really talking about here in particular, related to the offer and the value proposition, is not the intellectual property. So if we were, then Lord of the Rings and Marvel would beat you every time, right?
Oh, because you went up against
I
Skyrim the first time, didn't? Was it Skyrim you went
It
up
was The
against?
Witcher.
Oh, The Witcher.
So
Okay.
we
Yep.
went against The Witcher
Right.
Old World. Yeah,
That's
which
right.
was actually a pretty terrible thing for us because fantasy and very similar in many ways theme to what Deliverance did. But we were fine. It didn't matter. We still made
Mm.
$300,000 on a 314,000 for our first project,
Yep.
even though The Witcher was like, and still is, one of the highest funded Kickstarter projects of all time
Mm.
in board games. But that was it was totally fine. I was able to survive against that, no problem.
Yep.
Um, but if the value was off for our game, people would, that wouldn't have backed The Witcher would also not have backed Deliverance. That would have normally, because
Yep.
the numbers were off.
Yep.
So that's one thing that can capsize you. The value has to be there. Second thing is that's really really big is logistics. You have to have a plan to fulfill this product, and it has to make sense. You cannot make up your numbers. You can't cook your numbers and say, "Oh well, I think I could probably get away with charging $70. It costs me like, $20 to manufacture, or $15, or even $10 to manufacture. I think I could sell it for 70." And um I'm not exactly sure what the shipping is going to be. I'm just going to charge $15 for $20 for shipping. Be safe, say $30 for shipping.
Right.
That type of thing is what I call cooking. You're just making numbers up, and you're the chef in your kitchen cooking stuff up. What you need is, reliable people that you can trust, that know the numbers, that know the rates. So you have to get really solid partners that know things that you don't. And this is one of the major ways that you, as a newer business owner, can can actually instill confidence in backers. As a brand new first timer to Kickstarter, you will say, yes, I have not personally been through this experience before, but I have trusted partners that are very seasoned, that are guiding me and leading me.
Yeah, well,
So
that's why
yeah,
I'm, looking, as I mentioned, to hire you guys for all the marketing and all that sort of gear. Looking after the Facebook ads and whatever else that entails. And also, you had Constantinides. I hope I can call him Con, because I'll mess up his
yeah,
name every
yeah.
time. Um,
Constantinos with Hive.
Constantinos, okay, yeah, from Hype. So I've been in contact with Con, and I was meant to, I'm going to say Con. Um, uh, I was meant to meet with him this morning, but I booted him off because I'm meeting with you. Hey, Con, how you going, mate? Um, so I'll be looking to employ them, because I know they do things beyond Pledge Manager. They do consolidation, and they can look into your shipping and help you all that sort of stuff. So you're right. I will have great
Yep,
people behind me. As a first time creator. I have done one before a
yep,
long time ago. I wrote a graphic novel and did the Kickstarter for that. But the board game, man, that's a different beast. It's a different beast.
yeah. Yes, it
And
is.
something just occurred to me, Andrew.
So yeah,
Um, I, I, it, you're like the Joe Rogan of nerd podcasts, because you got like the shaved head and the stubble, and you've got a black belt in jiu-jitsu. So I just thought I'd say something really irrelevant.
yeah. I
You
need
want-
more rasp in my voice. Yeah, I was actually told that yesterday, that I looked like Joe Rogan, and someone else in like a second later said I thought he looked like Dana White. I was like,
No, they're completely
it's because I
different
have
looking
like a
dudes.
knotted up head and they do too, or what?
No, I think it's yeah. Also, you got to have like have the squinted eyes because I think Joe has a magical cigarette before each show.
Yeah.
But
Oh yeah, yeah.
anyway,
This
anyway.
is just from being tired all the time.
Yes,
So
yeah.
yeah.
I've only got two kids, and I know all about it. I know all about it. Okay, that's cool. All right, that's established some things there.
Yeah.
So who do you look
Yes.
to? Like, for example,
Last thing I want to mention this. Know your numbers. If you don't know your numbers, you don't know if it's gonna make money or not. You should know roughly how many you know from manufacturing standpoint. You need to know exactly how much it's going to cost to manufacture in China. For the most part, in China, if you use no plastic at all, you could probably get away with using like a Ludofact in Germany or something like that. But
yep, yep,
generally, you have to manufacture in China. So use a reliable company in China and know your numbers as far as what it will cost to freight all of your games from China over on the ocean on an ocean liner to the US or to each hub around the world, and what it will cost to fulfill what we call last mile shipping, the stuff from, let's say, your hub in Australia to all the backers in Australia and New Zealand, and what it
right.
will cost to ship from Germany to all the backers in the European Union and the etc.
I see.
So those are the
Okay,
things that will capsize you if you don't have them figured out.
right, right.
Being on BGG or getting your game on BGG is not one of those things. It's a nice thing to have. It will not make or break your campaign.
Okay,
So,
okay.
we
So
want to do the extra things that will add, really it's like the cream is the last 10% of the work. That's where I think the best results come from. But if you are missing a major piece of the foundation, like you don't have a logistics plan or you don't have your numbers figured out or you don't have an email list or things like that, if you don't have a crowd, those are things that can really hurt you. So,
yep, yep.
um, yeah,
Cool. All right,
yeah.
all right. Question two of 64 coming up.
That was only
Um,
one question.
this is going to be like a
Hopefully it's
trilogy
helpful.
podcast.
Yep.
Okay. So
30 minutes
basic,
in of
yeah,
9,000.
the base and deluxe. Um, so I hear a lot of fors and against. I know you've done base and deluxe, and I know people like Dave Beck and um, you know uh, Edward and I think it's Colbert from Galactic Cruise. These are all first time
Mm-hmm.
guys who did base and deluxe and did very well. And then I hear from so-called experts, and they may be, I don't know, to not go down that route. Uh, like what's the for and against, and when do you decide? Does it come into unit cost, all that sort of gear? And like if you're looking at, say, Hunter by God, it's high concept, but I don't necessarily know whether it will go retail or not. It may go onto
Mm-hmm.
Amazon. Is there any point me doing a base game, even though it seems like they get a quarter of the backers, or should I just go one deluxe unit, or does that in itself limit me because then I have limited sort of stretch goals? you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a great question. One that I wrestled with very much, and I have opinions on this that vary based upon if you're going into retail or not. So the crowdfunding platform, GameFound, Kickstarter, in general, the type of audience that goes there are, for the most part, what I call alpha gamers. They are early adopters, is probably the best way to put it. They're one of the reasons they go to crowdfunding, whereas I could go to my local game store and buy a legit, awesome, proven, great game and play it, but I'm going to Kickstarter and buying something that may arrive 2 years from now because I want the best version of the thing that is, that's one of the major reasons that people will buy. So a lot of the time, if people do not have a deluxe edition, it's not going to capsize you, but it does hurt the case that you're making for why you need crowdfunding.
Huh.
Another reason that people need crowdfunding is because it's their first project and they have no money. That's
Yep.
like
Yep.
why we kind of need crowdfunding. You've got to have something that kind of gets you started, right? And so the the deluxe game is one great way to say, hey, if you back this Kickstarter, you'll get something that won't exist at retail. So if you can get something really special now, if you like the game, it will be kind of a really, like I have a shelf behind me that has lots of games on it, and I value my premium games a whole lot more than the cheap ones that, if they break, I could replace for $20 because,
Yep.
code names or whatever. I mean,
Yep.
it's like I'll break it out, and I don't really, it's not as precious to me, right?
Yeah.
But
Yep.
as a
You'll
Kickstarter
let other
backer,
people touch them.
when
Yep.
I get right, so the premium components. Now I my first campaign, we did a base game. We sold 5% of to base games compared to deluxe. We sold 2,000 deluxe games and actually about 100 base games.
Huh.
And then in the pledge manager, about 60 of the base games upgraded to deluxe. So in the end, we had about 40 base games that we had to fulfill. And at that point, printing minimum quantity 1,000 base games or 500 base games would have cost us more than printing the same number of deluxe games.
See, that was what I was getting at.
So
Was like, does it cost you more if not as many get backed? Like, does it end up being a liability?
yes,
Right. But you
yeah.
still
So like for
recommend
us,
go.
the decision was to go from 0 to 1,000 base games printed, or to go from 4,000 to 5,000 deluxe games printed. We would have cost us more money to print base games
Huh.
per unit. And so what we decided to do, actually what I would generally recommend, if you make that, if it's at that point I would consider it a mistake that I made. I didn't read my audience well, and oh man, I have 40 of these base games. How do I even fulfill this? So what I would do is I would actually take out the miniature tray in my deluxe game and fill it with a foam block, and just say, like, I want to make sure that my Kickstarter backers feel respected. So I'm just going to give you the same size box without minis. This is
Right.
kind of what you get.
Okay.
And
Okay.
because those, yeah. So I think that a really good base game, it's meant to sell after the Kickstarter is over. So the Kickstarter, there is a one difference, like if you look at a company like Simon, when you see the base game versus the deluxe game, oftentimes it will be the exact same gameplay content with upgraded components only. So
Mm.
I consider there are actually three categories of games that make sense to a backer. Of your, rather, three different pieces of your game, the way that you produce it, that will make sense. One is the minimum entry point. So like the cheapest thing has half the gameplay content, but it's cheap. Then you have all the gameplay content, which is very important to have all the gameplay content. And then you can have gameplay plus cosmetic upgrades. Those are the three tiers. And I suggest you fit each of your offerings into one of those three things. It's like, how do I get all the gameplay content? How do I get all the cosmetic upgrades? And how do I get the cheapest entry point? And then what we'll do is we'll offer different ways to combine. Like if you wanted the deluxe game and just the metal coins, and you didn't want the neoprene mat or whatever, then you can kind of work that in there. But make sure you have those three options. And for me, I decided, actually, this last Kickstarter, I'm not even going to give base game as an option. It's like you
Mm.
get the deluxe game or nothing. And if you want to wait until after retail, we'll do a base game. I'm printing a base game this time. But it's was not available as an offering on Kickstarter. So that is specifically going to go to Amazon and retailers that want it. However, all the retailers that backed our Kickstarter campaign want the deluxe edition, um, and so they'll get the deluxe. But so the thing that will sell on Amazon needs to be under $60 and appeal to
Oh,
8 to 12-year-old boys,
okay.
and
Yep.
then it has an opportunity to sell there.
Gotcha.
So
Gotcha.
that's generally what I'd recommend there.
Cool. All right. Let's see. I've got things like this is one that always throws me, Andrew. Add-ons. How do you decide
Yeah.
which and how many of each? Because add-ons are a specific amount. Like you've got to have those things manufactured without pre-order. So it's like, okay, if I'm going to, for example, if I'm going to have neoprene mats, which I doubt, just say I am. How many do I have made? How do I know? How do I know? Like, do I put a cap on it
Yes.
that's sort of like feasible cap? And what happens if it doesn't sell that many? I've lost money.
Yeah. So the first thing is that add-ons, if your game sells, well, first of all, backing up, you need to make sure that your people want the add-on. So Deliverance, we had metal coins, acrylic standees, and a neoprene mat. Those were the 3 add-ons that we had for our first campaign. And that was because people wanted them. However, the neoprene mat, there were some questions where people were like, you have this idea for the neoprene mat. I'm showing them the idea before we launch on Kickstarter. It's really important that your people know what it is that the offer is well before you actually launch your campaign.
Okay, so you gauge the
You
audience.
don't want to keep it a surprise until launch day, right?
Yeah.
So you get your people's buy-in. If they want the neoprene mat, then they'll tell you. You give them the offering and say, hey, what do you guys think if we upgraded this into a neoprene mat? This is the game board. And then people will say, well, is it functional for gameplay, or is it exclusively cosmetic, or does it add anything to the game? And you'll get those types of questions. You reason that out with your people and say, well, what would you guys like? And eventually they say, well, we would like a neoprene mat that is about the same size as the board, that has room for the for me, it was the darkness track, so it actually would replace a component, not just be purely cosmetic, but also would have some functional gameplay. And that's what they wanted. And I was like, okay, well, what do you think about this? And people liked it. So then when it came down to, so I didn't know how many people were going to buy, and it came down to, okay, how much is it going to take to manufacture this neoprene mat? And I figured out the minimum order quantity, for long pack games was, I want to say it's either 500 or 1,000 units. And let's just say it was like $6 for the neoprene mat to manufacture that, and I needed 1,000 of them. That means it's going to be $6,000 to get all the neoprene mats. And so in addition, I'd have to manufacture a minimum quantity of games, which let's just say is also 1,000, and each game costs $10 to keep things simple.
Yep.
$10,000 for the games, $6,000 for the neoprene mats. My minimum funding goal is going to kind of start to be fashioned around a $16,000 manufacturing bill.
Yep.
So even though I may end up saying, okay, each game is, so if it's $16,000, you want to add some extra, wiggle room. So for me, I'm just busting out my calculator here. So I'm just throw out this random manufacturing number of $16,000 for 1,000 units of stuff. So 1,000 neoprene mats and 1,000 base games, and there you go. So 16,000. I want to multiply, or so I'm going to add like $2 to $3 a unit for freight costs. So that's $2,000, let's say, for freight costs. I'm at 18,000. Then I want to add, let's just say, 10% of this for overages. So I'm going to multiply that by 1.1, and then that's $19,800. Just in case, like, my numbers are off. If it was like,
Yep.
oh, the neoprene mats cost $650 a piece. I
Right. So
want
you
to be able to
you're a
have
bit of a
wiggle
buff.
room that I don't lose.
Okay. Okay.
Right. And then in the end, for Kickstarter, they're going to take roughly they're going to take 5% of the total funding amount, and Stripe is going to take its fee, which is right around 3%. So what I do is I add another 10% there
That was one of my
for
questions. That
miscellaneous
was one of my
fees.
questions, was buffing your actual costs so you don't get whatever your costs don't get eaten into by fees, and you burn yourself
Yes.
there.
So with my random example of $16,000 in product cost plus $2,000 in logistics to get it sent to where it needs to go, and then I multiply that by 10%. I add 10% to that just in case I'm missing something, and then I add 10% to that total, or I multiply that by whatever 110%. Actually, that was a weird way to say that. So I want to add 10% more to that total. I end up with a funding total of $21,780. And for backers, I'm just going to make it 21,900 is
Okay.
my funding goal. It's like a
Okay.
nice rounded
Yep.
number, and
And allows
there you
wiggle
go.
room.
Yes. And so if something goes wrong, and I'm going to estimate my shipping, it's going to say, okay, shipping is $23 in the US or whatever. Well, That's probably too expensive for the random game I made up, but let's just say shipping is like $16 a package. So we'll just tell them shipping's $16. You want to add 10% to that too, just in case. Um,
Okay.
and you want to kind of plan for that.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of ways to do that and not pass the cost on to the end consumer, which we can get into later. But in general, it's comes down to the offer. But your funding goal of, in this case, $21,900. If you met that funding goal, you would be able to deliver a game and a neoprene mat to each of the people. So you're charging shipping separately. Um, and then you would not have to worry about, can I actually afford the neoprene mats, right?
Right.
So
Right. Cool. All right. So next question. It's like I'm interviewing you.
all right.
So we've got stretch goals. Stretch goals is one that confuses me as well. All right. So stretch goals are always like, and aside from the whole argument of should you or shouldn't you, I'm going to do the stretch goals. How do you
Yes,
decide them?
do it.
How do you
It is
decide
smart to do.
at what dollar level do you do them? How do you decide
Mhm.
firstly what they are and how they're factored in, like financially? Like I've heard mixed things. I've heard that you account for them initially,
Mhm.
like it's like an inflated number. So you hear a lot of things about stretch goals being
Mhm.
fabricated, like they already exist
Yep.
within the funding goal, or that your um, funding goal, your material costs allow for your budget allows for the stretch goals to uh, exist should they come into reality. If I've worded that right, have
Yes.
I
So,
worded that right?
first thing is, so let's say when you make a game, or going back to Deliverance, when I made Deliverance, I had to make 9 miniature sculpts for 9 characters and whatnot. I never got a manufacturing quote that did not include all 9 characters.
That's
Um,
a better way to put it. Yeah. Do you
but what
quote
I
for the
did was,
entire thing?
yeah,
Okay.
yes, you definitely want to quote for the entire thing. So really, to me, stretch goals are at this point are kind of a game that people expect. But the thing that people hate the worst, or hate the most, that are people that are experienced tabletop game backers on
Yep.
Kickstarter and GameFound and whatnot, they do not like stretch goals that are untested. So I'm going to make a bunch of stretch goals. Here they are. And I have to make all this content now. That's something that people don't like. So if you're adding a new character and it's like, oh, I'll have the art piece later and I'll have the character board later, I'm going to make a gunslinger. And people won't, the gunslinger they believe is going to be imbalanced and not very fun, not very creative because it's not been playtested, it's not been created. It's going to be just thrown in the box. And that's something I would rather have less content that is of a higher quality that's been all play tested and whatnot. So one of the things that you definitely want to do is you want to play test all your stretch goals. And if there's anything that is not play tested, let's say, like for example, in maybe certain cards, like you can add a bonus card effect that deals 2 damage to the nearest unit. Like that type of thing doesn't really need the same amount of playtesting that a
Yep.
whole character or an entire scenario or other things like that need.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so you should consider that. Several types of stretch goals that are very good that people really like. They love quality upgrades. So, for example, you upgrade every card to have linen finish.
Hmm.
It's a really simple thing, and every cardboard component and whatnot, upgrade that to have linen finish. People like that, and it's just because it's an upgrade. It's like the quality component upgrade. You can have a card
Yeah.
thickness increase from like 270 GSM white core to 305 GSM black core Chinese black core cardstock.
Black Hawk. Yep.
And that's something that your manufacturer can go over. So you can have a game that you want to make that's like $12, but you can say, well, how would we make this cheaper? Maybe your gray board, they call it basically your cardboard components. Maybe they're only 1.5 millimeters thick instead of 2. Maybe, and then you can have a quality upgrade that increases the thickness and other things like that. So what I would
Okay.
recommend doing is quote your kind of your final copy that you want and find ways to strip out the quality.
I say you walk it back.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So you're kind of reverse engineer all your stretch goals. Now I will say this, that what we decided to do in this next Deliverance campaign, I was very pleased with this change I made, which was, and I see this happen all the time in other campaigns. So our characters, the angel characters you play, are the reason that you would want to. One of the main reasons you'd want to buy this game is because of how awesome it feels to play various, the different characters. And so when you add another character, it adds the greatest amount of replayability of any, we'll say anything that you can add into the game.
Yep.
And in our first campaign, we used our characters as stretch goals. We had big gaps between, it's like $2,000 to get a pair of cards, but to get a new character was like 15 or $20,000.
Right.
And
Because
it's
you're taking into account the tooling and the digital sculpting cost and all that sort of stuff, right? So that's factoring into the stretch goal. Is that correct?
yeah, but yeah, you've got the miniature. Well, a lot of these things I've done. So I've done all the miniature sculpts. I showed the 3D sculpts, which they're about $400 a piece, and I had 9 of them.
Yep.
So we're revealing the miniature sculpt, and we're showing the character card. There are 15 mini-sized cards that go with each character. There's a standee that goes with each character, etc. And so it's an expensive stretch goal because there are a lot of components
Yep.
for a single character in our game. But what I found was that early on we knocked down several stretch goals really fast because we raised $200,000 within the first couple of within the first week. We
Yep.
raised about $200,000 in on our first campaign, and or somewhere between 150 and 200,000.
Yep.
And then our funding slowed down like very much. It slowed down to like 2,500 a day, 1,500 a day, and in the mid campaign, and people started to kind of lose heart, and they were like, "Oh man, we're only making 1,500 or $2,000 a day. We have $20,000 to go before we get to that next angel, and hopefully we can. I don't even know if we can unlock the last one, because that's another $20,000 more." And how can we do it if we're only making 1,500? And so backers, even though you're going to have a groundswell at the end that catapults you, they're like, well, what are we doing now, and how long is it going to take to get to the next one, and all of that. And so what we decided to do was this time we had a combination of stretch goals and periodic unlocks. So once a week I would unlock and reveal a brand new angel, and everyone would be really excited, and I'm like, hey, come back and look at the campaign to see what angel's coming out every Thursday. We're doing 4 angel unlocks every single Thursday. Come back and take a look and have fun, and kind of celebrate this momentous thing with us. And then in
Okay.
the meantime, we're going to unlock stretch goals that are related to cards and of various kinds, and generally content upgrades. And every once in a while I'll throw in something like a quality increase, like spot varnish on the box, or everything gets linen finish and whatever. Even in this last campaign, like there's no way in heck I was going to do a game without an insert or without linen finish or whatever. It had to match the quality of the other game. I still included them as stretch goals. Like, I know this sounds stupid, but if we actually want an insert, I needed to make this amount of money. I'm
Right.
sorry, guys. I know I never quoted without an insert, but if we didn't raise $125,000, I need the ability to not have to produce an insert for this game in order
Yep.
to make it affordable, right?
I
And
see.
so it's super
So,
easy to understand, even for very seasoned backers.
so what's the two things with that? Firstly, we talk about a base and deluxe. But if you've got a deluxe, you've got the upgraded components. Then where does that leave the stretch goals? Like if you've got upgraded cards and resources and whatever else, then what purpose does the stretch goal serve? If are you upgrading them again, or like you've got to have some point of difference between the base and deluxe? And I thought the deluxe would
Right.
have what you were aiming for with the stretch
So
goal. That's where I get
that's
lost a bit.
yeah, so that's a good. So the first thing is make sure that the base game and deluxe game, each of the purpose as to why they exist is very clear to your backer. So I buy the base game because it's the cheap one. I buy the deluxe game because it's the good one. Now, if you're going to offer stretch goals, you could, and again, be very clear about what it does. That's the most important thing, because if your backers, if you're like, hey, none of these stretch goals apply to the base game, that's just the way it is. Only stretch goals apply to the deluxe game. They will be given that information up front, and they will either accept it or reject it. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to say afterward like, oh, these stretch goals only apply to the deluxe one or whatever.
Yep.
Like what you a lot of the time base games and deluxe games, if they do not differ on gameplay, then the cosmetic, helpful things or cool looking like minis, for example, when you unlock a new character, the deluxe version gets a miniature, the base doesn't,
Uh-huh.
right?
Oh,
And
I
so
see.
as long as you're very clear to backers, it's better. But the more you go into base game, deluxe game, the more difficult it's going to be for you as a first time creator to make sure the lines don't blur at all. You just want to
Right.
make sure the offering is very clear.
Yep. Yeah. Oh, all right. Okay. I
Yeah.
simply gonna need a second coffee. Um, let's see. So this is for generally people launching from other countries, which is like me. You might pick
Mhm.
that from the Australian accent. Um, so launching from here, Kickstarter will show the Australian price, and the Australian dollar at the moment
Yes.
is sort of bouncing around the $65, 65 cent American mark,
Yes.
which means that theoretically, if I had $100 game, which it won't be, it will pop up as $165 and no one will buy it. Uh, is there any way around that? Do I give you my Kickstarter login and you press the big green button? Like, what is there any way around that?
So you have to launch from, if it's your company and you own it and the liability shield and all that, you have to launch yourself. There are ways. So certain countries like,
Fly to America?
South America or whatever, yeah, you will need like a third party to work with. But I just one of the campaigns that launched at the same time was Shem Phillips launched from Garful Games a game called Scara Bray, and I think another one called Anarchy. It was like same day as Deliverance, and he's from
Yep.
New Zealand. So
I'm playing
um,
Hunter by God with Sam McDonald today.
okay, that's awesome. Sam,
Sam, like,
he, he gave me a
yeah,
bunch of encouragement for Deliverance. When I guess he ordered our game and loved it, and just wrote something on BGG, and it was like,
yeah, it's
wow,
cool.
a accomplished designer was like liked our game. That was super super
Oh
cool.
my God.
Okay, so first of all, the vast majority of your audience is going to be American. No, as in like United States
Yep,
citizens or
yep.
whatever living in the US. They have the most disposable income. Most of the time, you'll have 65% or more of your audience that backs the game will be from the US. And this
Mm,
varies, of course. There are plenty of outliers, but you want to plan on making sure that it's clear to everybody, but above all, Americans. And the dollar, I think, is a strong anchor for people's understanding. So, citizens in the EU generally understand what the euro versus the dollar is like, or what the British pound to the dollar is. But they might not understand what the difference between the euro and the Australian dollar, or the Canadian
yeah,
dollar to the Australian dollar, right?
yeah. I
And
don't. Yep.
so right, so that um what I find is, first of all, you put everything in Australian dollars, and then Kickstarter will automatically convert the information based upon the so my location is in the US. I would see the US dollar version of that price. So you want to say, for example, if it was if you wanted to make a product $99 US, you would go figure out the exchange rate and say, okay, it's going to be approximately whatever, $147 Australian, and or 160 Australian, and that's going to be approximately 99 USD. So you want to make sure that it shows $99 approximate on Kickstarter, not 100.
Yeah.
Um, Make sure
Okay.
that that you're, when you're playing the game with the price, and it's like a $20 game and you need to charge $100, you're going to list it for 99. Make sure that Kickstarter shows that it costs, the converted value is approximately $99 USD, not $100. So that's one
I
thing.
see.
And
I see it sometimes like as part of the graphic as opposed to the digital. I know in the pledge tiers, it's
Yes,
part of the graphic.
that's what I was
It
going to
says,
say as well.
yeah, okay,
You want to make sure that the the number is very clear as far as like what this pledge level costs in your home country, because I would assume that if you go to conventions and whatnot, they'll be more likely local conventions and things. You don't want to neglect your own currency, but at the same time you want to translate that currency anywhere you display your currency to US dollars.
yep,
That way
cool,
people can say, okay, approximately 79 US dollars for the base game, 99 for the deluxe, 149 for all in. Um, and it's whatever 210 Australian dollars, but it 149 US, or that kind of thing.
yep,
It's
yep,
so
yep.
that's a smart way to go. Um, and I actually see people lose money by not doing that. That are
Oh
from different
God,
countries.
yeah, or you
Yeah,
terrify them. Like there's no, I can look at a first time
yeah.
creator and my game's, $170 or whatever. Like, no, that, yeah, next. All right. How we going? Oh, we got. Do we have time for another,
We're good. I
Andrew?
think we could do a few more.
Okay, beauty. All right. Well,
Yeah,
I'm
if we
actually
rifle them
I'm
quick.
near the end, mate. So let's see
I'm
what else we
answering
got
other
here.
questions on accident.
Okay. Um,
Yeah.
I think I've only got one question left,
Okay.
and then we could just talk about my game for an hour or so. All right. Is
All right.
there like is is there is there oh, just before that. So you read and hear a lot of times that for your first Kickstarter, you know, release something small like a card game, all that sort of stuff. Now, obviously, insane people like yourself and I, we decide to make huge dudes on a map, um, you know, tactical, complex, you know, games. Yours around medium weight, I believe. Deliverance is around medium weight.
Hmm.
Yeah, so it's
Yep.
still a lot. That's a lot of game in there. Um,
Yep.
so, but my school of thought is that you can only create what you create, right? You can only create what you think of. If I can't think of a card game, and I've tried to think of card games, believe me, um, what do you think is like the biggest um, bugbears, like the biggest issues, problems with? Now I know this is a big question, though, so I don't expect it answered all. With having a game of like deliverances and hunted by God's nature, where it's a large game as a first
Which is
release,
naturally a big game.
naturally a big game,
Yep.
a lot of minis, a lot of
So,
components, and a lot involved. But both these games, I think the upside is they've got high concepts, so they've got a sort of
yeah.
like an immediate appeal. Um, that said,
So I
like
think I know what you're asking, which is
I
you're
hope
you're
I know.
asking
Yeah,
so you're I think you're ask or I think I know what you're asking, which is that should the common advice would be dip your toe into the water before you jump all the way in, because
yeah,
with a big project you're jumping all the way in and you may find that it's shark infested waters and you can't
yeah,
you can't
yeah,
swim, or
yeah,
but then
exactly. And
it's a much lower risk campaign,
yeah,
right, to
but you
do a
can't.
card game or something.
If you haven't thought of a card game, if you can't think of a card game, and this is your
Yeah.
passion, I mean, a passion will get you a long way to,
Yes.
and positive obsession, I like to call it, will get you a long way, um, towards really seeing it succeed. And as we said before, having strong firms and people behind you. But there must be huge obstacles or things that you faced. So I'm sort of asking
Mhm.
you, what were the big things that you faced? Is like, oh man, this is gonna be tough to, or things you even learnt afterwards.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, so I one time I read an article on it was on Jamie Stegmaier's blog, kickstarterlessons.com. If you don't know it, it's a
yep,
really great resource. And it was, do I design the big game or do I design the small one? And there are different ways to approach it, but generally I find this was kind of the answer that I leaned on in that article is design what you're most passionate about. Because in the end, you use that word and I think it's the right word to use. You have to get up every day and move the ball forward. And if you're not passionate about what it is that you're working on, then it's just not going to be easy to get up and move the ball forward. It's a grind, and it's a lot of work, and it's sometimes not very fun. I remember after I funded Deliverance, we funded and we raised all this money, and then I recovered from lack of sleep and everything, and I woke up one day, I'm like, man, this feels like work now. Like I've been working on this thing for years,
Yep.
and then we
Yep.
finally went to Kickstarter after 5 years and funded a ton of money, and it was amazing. And so many people would have loved to fund like that for their first project.
Of
And
course.
here I am having done that. And I wake up and I'm like, I just feel like a little anxiety working on Deliverance now,
Yeah.
because it doesn't quite feel like the play that it did.
Yep.
And
Yep.
that's the way that it kind of is. It's like, oh, this is now kind of a job. I've been paid for this now, and I have to deliver. And
Yep.
so a lot of publishers will oftentimes not design their own games because there's so much business on the business side to be done, that they
Mm.
design one game and then they will take other people's designs, because designing is takes a lot of time,
Mm.
um, and a lot of effort and energy and work, right? And so um, publishing does too, but when you're a designer publisher, you have to do all of it. Now the being diligent, there's something to be said for being diligent, but then being passionate about the project you're working on, that to me is the extra secret sauce, that if you are passionate about it, you're going to work harder on it, and
Yep.
it's easier to be diligent on something you're
Absolutely.
passionate about
Absolutely.
versus something you kind of feel miserable, you're trying to get out of the way and
Yeah. You
whatnot. And I
literally
think
can't give
that
up on
also
it.
translates to what people, yeah, yeah, and I think that also translates to what people are backing on Kickstarter, where if they see a project that that you weren't passionate about, but you made to kind of get out of the way. And I've seen people do this before. Those projects tend not to be that successful,
Mm.
because the passion just doesn't come out of every orifice of this
Yep.
game, right?
Yep.
Like the big one, right?
Yep.
And so it's a so I side on be passionate about what you're working on, because at a certain point it will cease feeling like a game and start feeling like work.
Right.
And you need to be able to finish the race that you started, right?
And that's when
So
discipline takes over,
uh, yeah, yeah.
when passion's not there.
So,
Yeah.
and trust me, by the time you finish making the game, you will have so many ideas that threaten to take you off the beaten path. You're like, just a matter of which one do I focus on, um, you'll have ideas that you're like, oh, I have a really cool idea, and you're working like 80% the way through your Kickstarter's fulfillment, and you want to stop and go chase this weird butterfly that's like flying over this
I
direction.
know. Oh
Just write
man,
that
I
thing
know.
down, put it in a notebook, and then finish your project,
For
right?
a second printing, are you
So
talking about like another idea or a second print or another or different or an
another
iteration
idea.
for your game? Yeah.
By the
Yeah.
time you finish with, and deliver your first game, you will have a good idea for your
Yeah.
next one that you want to work
Oh
on.
no,
And you're like, I can't wait to work on this as soon
I
as my
know.
first idea
I've
is
been
done.
working on another one for a couple of years, and I'm unlike Hunter by God, which I think really took 2 years to start to get its find its feet. This one I think was a couple of months. I just had the idea, and obviously design experience helps because you just get to things faster because you know what they're doing. But yeah, I can't wait to get to that. But like you said, if I kickstart this thing, then I'm really gonna have to try and find the time. I to work on that new one while publishing. Like with Hunter by a Guide, it's been 5.5 years of average of 10 hours, 15 hours a week, and early mornings, and early mornings so you can spend time with your kids. It's like with you, you got to have the work-life balance. So get up super early, ruin
Yes.
yourself, um, have some time with your kids and your family, and have do something family-wise. Sometimes that doesn't happen because you get so much on, um, and then you know, but it's you know, um, it's something you like I interjected before as you couldn't imagine your life without it. You just because you're always thinking about it, and if you took that away,
Something
it'd
that
be
needed to exist. Right.
something that needed to exist. Yeah,
So
and that's what's driven me to this point.
that's
Yeah.
awesome. That's
Hence
awesome. Now,
why, hence why I'm here. Hence why my post on BGGL because I'm not giving up just because
yep.
the partnership
Yeah.
dissolved.
And that's what this industry is filled with, passion projects, and I love those passion projects are the only projects, in my opinion, that actually make it.
Yep.
There has to be something special about them. And but I think that any project that somebody's passionate about, you can find enough backers to fund. I mean, I personally believe that any project, given enough passion and drive, can fund. As long as they're actually trying to do something special that they think is special, that you can find 300 backers.
Yeah,
With
yeah.
anything.
I mean, and passion, I think a lot of it comes from faith in your game. Like, you hear passion pouring out of people like yourself when you talk about deliverance on the podcast, or anytime you hear Dave Beck interviewed, he's just bursting with it. And
Yep.
Edward and the team from Galactic Cruise, I've heard them interviewed quite a few times on your podcast and others, and it's you hear that because it's a love of the game. And
Yep.
yeah, I think a lot of it comes from this the play side of the design process, and then you get into the work. Yeah, yeah.
Very good. So, any final thoughts you have on this topic? Any last question or thought you'd like to share?
I think, in summary, it's basically the purpose of this podcast, which was reach out and become informed. I want my Kickstarter to succeed. I want people to have faith in me, and I want to have people who are in the know behind me. People like yourself. Um, you know, Bleach Mania are probably looking at hiring Hive, very good artists, and just a wealth of great people on uh, forums like Board Game Design Lab, started by Gabe, and just an amazing resource, a very generous, open people. 4 or 5, 6 people reached out to saying, just PM me, and I'll help you out. Just so reach out, and what you don't know, but eventually you will.
Yeah. Yeah, and don't let so I would say, I have two thoughts that I'd like to kind of conclude with myself was don't let inexperience stop you from trying. I think that there's a real skill that should be developed, which is the skill of failing. I think you should get good at failing and failing quickly,
Yep.
and pivoting, and actually being taking whatever lessons you learn from failure, whatever, however small or large the failure is, fail fast and make changes and do it better. Ray Kroc had 50 something jobs, and he found McDonald's in his 50s, which was his big claim to fame. And
Yep.
there's that whole crazy story of the McDonald's brothers, and I think they got kind of, he didn't do very nice for them, um but the idea is like you have to fail quickly and fail often, um so that you can, I mean, the road to success is paved with failures.
Yeah.
And so I think that nobody becomes an overnight success without putting a ton of work in that you don't see,
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
And so
Absolutely.
I think that that's really one lesson. And it's possible to kind of, as they say, and sometimes in board games, shoot the moon, or come from behind with an epic victory, where you just start and then you have this sudden success. If you didn't work diligently to get there, it's going to be really hard to replicate. It's a lot easier when you are diligent. And, like, I always look at Stonemeyer Games as an example of a company that does an incredible job on all their projects. They're very, very successful. And
Mm,
Wingspan was
yeah.
just a matter of skill and diligence that met opportunity
Yeah.
and
Great vision. Yep.
good fortune, right?
Yep.
So, but they're making other projects that I expect may even eclipse Wingspan, as
Yep.
far as the sales and popularity and whatnot,
Yep.
just because they're diligent and they have they know who they are and all of that, right? The last thing I wanted to mention is I think there's one other thing that can capsize you, which is super duper important. And that is, if you have a family, wife, kids, make sure everyone is on the same page and willing to support you in what it is that you're going through.
Yeah.
And I speak as one that is married for over 15 years now with 7 children.
Yeah.
Um, my wife is behind me, not only because she is always in my corner, which she always is, but because we talk about this stuff and we have an agreement together about each thing that I do. So, the fact that I'm doing an expansion Kickstarter campaign, that was a discussion that happened when I was working on the first Deliverance campaign, kind of wrapping up the development and the, uh, graphic design files for manufacturing and whatnot. It was like, are we going to do this again? And that was a conversation that we had. I wanted to, of course, I want to do an expansion, but I needed to make sure that we both talk about it, arrive mutually at the conclusion that yes, let's do this, because without that blessing, it's very easy to capsize.
Right.
Capsize
Yeah, that would
your
permeate right
your
through your
personal
life.
life, capsize the project.
Yeah, and also you just
So,
miss them. Like
I think that's really
the game
important.
design takes up a lot of time.
Yeah.
Imagine publishing does. You just miss them, and it's
Hmm.
why I get up at a ridiculous time in the morning. So, but very true, very true.
Yes.
I've been informing my
Yeah.
wife, all the way along, like what's coming, and now with this unexpected, um, curveball, there's more coming. Luckily, she's an incredibly smart woman who, will help me a lot of the way. So I've got a good team. No, absolutely. It's a difficult one because I think uh, the natural way of the game designer is obsession, and you'd love to sit in your study tinkering away for 40 hours a day, but
Yeah.
you can't do that. You can't do that to yourself or others.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, how can people find your campaign or your project? So, what's it called? And give me like the 30-second pitch on what
All
it
right,
is.
30-second pitch. I was listening to someone the other day. I thought I need
Yeah.
my 30-second pitch. I just
Yeah.
I just demonstrated it 19 times at PAX, so it sort of helps. Um, so my game is called Hunted by a God. It's a game in which you take command of a galactic empire, one of four, asymmetric, and they scour the universe looking for resource. They find a planet which they believe to be uninhabited and resource rich. And upon landing, they waken a dormant god and its lesser gods, who will pursue you as you try and um, collect as much resource as possible, because your empire needs as much resource to survive to the next planet. So it's got asymmetric empires, it's got variable powers, it's got tech trees, it's got tactical combat. What else does it have, Paul? You should know these things off the top of your head. It's got push your luck. The push your luck seems to be very popular with people. And it can be found at huntedbygod.com/landing page. That's my email page. That's the most important one. Just ask Andrew. Um, Facebook.com and we just look up Hunted by a God, and we've got a group there and a page, and we're also on Instagram just as huntedbygod.com. Yep.
Very good. Very good. Well, I'll say, it's been a pleasure talking with you. Whenever I, we have conversations like this, it's because I felt like, well, we could have had a conversation, just you and I, in a Facebook message or in a call or something like that. But it seemed like just what do I not know about starting this business or about pursuing Kickstarter? If the game itself is ready, that seemed like a conversation that more people would find value out of, and so I really
Absolutely.
wanted to have you on the podcast. And thank you for joining me. Good luck in your endeavors. It's a really fun thing to watch for me from the sidelines, and I've been following your progress, and so definitely want to just you're not alone. Sometimes game design can feel like a lonely road, but
Oh
you've
man,
got a bunch
absolutely.
of travelers to your left and right that sometimes you can't see, right? i'm
Cool.
i'm there. I'm one of them, so.
I appreciate it, and I appreciate you having me on after 4 years of listening to you guys fanatically. It's both surreal and amazing to be on, and I'm really grateful for you having me on, and for answering my plethora of questions. It's been great. I really appreciate it. Thanks a lot, Andrew.
Awesome. All right, well, we're gonna have Robot Richard send us on out.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week's episode of Crowdfunding Nerds. For more resources, articles, and to listen to past podcasts, please visit us at crowdfundingnerds.com. And if you have a crowdfunding question, we also have a page on our site where you can send a message directly to us. Please visit crowdfundingnerds.com/question. question. And if your question is a great question, we may include it in a future podcast. Thank you all again for listening to this week's episode, and we'll see you next week. Stay nerdy.